made it very, very clear what the agenda of the large bilateral and multilateral donors has been since the early 60s. So it's nothing new. The first World Bank's report on agriculture was 1972, and the next one happened in 2007. So it's 25 years later, but the politics remained the same. Their understanding of the peasant question is an understanding of a final solution for peasantry. So they are saying it openly that the kind of peasantry that we have in our countries, in these ancient civilizations, should not continue. They should be de-peasantized. This peasantry should be moved off from the land question into a labor question, and thereafter the skill building of this labor, and they're very, very clear. But unfortunately, many of the southern governments, including our own, we hear parroting the same line, that India should aspire for a northern model of growth, for a northern model of catching up, where you have 1 or 2 or 4%. USA has 4% people in peasantry, UK has 1, Ireland has a crisis now, and we'll come to that some other time later. But essentially go towards that. And that is where you see actually things happening. In the last decade or so, we have reduced 13-14% of our peasantry. So the question is, where have they gone? Where have all that millions of people who were once upon a time peasants, where are they today? China has reduced in the last decade an equal number of, today China's peasant population is 53%. It's worrying what's happening, given the land size and other things. So that's alarming. That's the political point is already made. What's the understanding? How they want to gravitate the land towards a willing buyer, willing seller formula, what is called the market assisted land reforms program, which many countries have bought hook, line and sinker in their policy paradigms. The other thing that they are propagating, which is equally worrying, and particularly land movements need to keep a watchful eye on that, is this jargon called social protection. Now it's a very, very worrying development. So this is a new incarnation of what is called social safety nets. The whole idea is to move the farmers from the land into a labor sector and provide them some sops in the name of populism, what KBG referred to earlier, in the shape of old age pensions, in the shape of widow pensions, in the shape of higher conditional cash transfer schemes. So those are the kind of policy prescriptions which are being either sold or being propagated throughout the South, and we need to keep a watchful eye on that. As far as other donor agencies and land reforms, it is true, Jagat Bhai, we don't see even NGO donor organizations radically on the land reform agendas. Very, very, very few. There may be exceptions, but those are particular historical in nature. And I'll come back actually at this point to the point you were making about NGOism. See, in our opinion, we in ActionAid have been deliberating it in our strategic thinking. In our opinion, NGOism is a pretty peripheral question. See, if you see it from the people's point of view, what are the instruments of change people have at their hands? Those instruments of change are either political parties, those instruments of change are social movements and community movements, right, which are close to those people. Those instruments of change are their local governance and power mechanisms. Those instruments of change might also be in occasion media people or people who articulate the views outside. NGOs are pretty far from that. The situation of NGOs is not proximus to people in most instances. There may be exceptions. But unfortunately what's happened in the last 3 decades, to be more precise, the NGO question somewhat has overtaken the other spaces, and this is dangerous. In fact, Africa has this famous statement that NGOs are responsible for tying the African canoe to the neoliberal ship. So NGOs are under continuous attack, and rightly so in many, many cases, for having aided fractured people's movements and having aided a general tendency towards a neoliberal enterprise. So that has to be carefully monitored. So that has to be very carefully monitored. And in this light, it is important for social movements. There has to be a remanufacture of a new political instrument or a renewal of a political instrument, because there is crisis on other fronts too. Crisis on the political parties front too. Crisis on also the social movements front of a different nature, completely different nature and different magnitude. So there needs to be a reimagination by progressive peoples in terms of how do you re-articulate the political instrument. Would you allow the political instrument to continue the way it is fractured, social movements on the one side, fragmented and non-representative political parties on the other side, peripheral NGOs on the third side, a mass media which is completely captured by capitalist interests on the fourth side. So how do you re-articulate it? And there needs to be some thinking. I know some countries are beginning to do it. Bolivian case is an interesting case to watch for, where at least the social movements and the political parties are coming together to talk this issue on the table. In our country, here in India as well, there have been efforts, most notably in the shape of, not always successful, but most notably in the shape of formation of National Alliance of People's Movements, coming together, at least a beginning of that churning. So that's the other point I wanted to make on NGOism and the NGO instrument itself. The third was the question of what are the opportunities. There are three big questions at this point, rallying points and opportunities. KBG has set the tone and the politics. I just add three other tendencies to it. Some he's already said. The first, we are at a time in the global south where you see a huge move towards de-peasantization, country after country. People being pushed out of peasantry into labor force, people who are underfed, underclothed. In Indian case, it's 78-75% of people who survive less than $1 a day. But this case is not unique. Bangladesh is similar story to tell. Jagat Bhai, what you were saying is the same story in Nepal. China isn't very far off. So there are issues to watch out for, which brings another question to the table. How, in the shape of, in China now they started calling the whole concept as a peasant worker. There is peasant hyphenated with worker. In India we are not far away from that. Among the marginal farmer households, our average land holding has fallen in the last 10 years, per capita land holding is around 1 acre. In China's case it's 0.6. Around 1 hectare. In China's case it's 0.6 hectares. In Nepal's case you mentioned it's 0.8 hectares. But these averages hide more than they reveal. But even if we had fundamental land reforms, which never were, this question will need to be asked: how do you supplement the farm income? And is there a duality? I mean, the world has understood it as a duality. But is there a different way of organizing where you continue to be peasants, but where you also have the question of rural industry serving you? Because as KBG was saying, land question cannot only be minimized to an economic question. It is much more than that. It is our identity, it is our futures, and the whole peasant question in the south is not purely an economic question. So that also has to be rethought. I think there is an advance needed there. Some contestations are happening there. We are hearing voices again from among people's movements about rural industrialization, about rural diversification, not a neoliberal diversification, but the question of industry at the service of masses, not industry at the service of a few capitalists and private profit. A dream which was there in the past, during the liberation of the South, but which got lost very soon thereafter. So what we saw was emergence of public sector and hijack of public sector into private hands completely. That needs to be reversed. That one question is there. The second question is already touched on quite centrally, is the question of the retrogressive nature of the new land reforms. The new retrogressive land reforms, or the corporate grabs and the takeover of land. I was in Beijing yesterday, and their newspaper headlines yesterday was the China Daily headlines that land seizures threaten to disrupt countryside calm. So there are huge land seizures happening in China. There are huge land seizures happening in India. We've lost something to the tune of what is 17 million hectares
10 years.
In 10 years. So we don't know where it has gone. SEZs don't explain it. Country after country, that's the case. So this is another new contestation area, which leads to a different nature of struggles. And the third, I would say, which he touched on, but I would like to emphasize it here, it's not just land reforms. It's not just a fight for agricultural land. The big fight is the fight over all natural resources. Fight over water. This is the big fight in the next 1 decade. Fight over forests. He referred to it. A fight over minerals. A fight over commons. So that's that big fight.